Mr. Palmer.
Good morning, Mr. Deegan, Mr. East Coaster.
That's right. It's 2 hours behind, so good day. And we'll be as neutral as possible. I missed it. You weren't even jamming along to the drums. You're deep in thought.
No, I was trying to write, and I can't do two things at the same time. So, I missed my drumming thing, but we already did that episode. So no more drumming for me. My drumming career is over.
Well, yeah, we still got to get you the band hat. But anyways, how are you, sir?
Wait, hold on. Oh, wait. Is that no. We're not doing that.
Yes, we are.
Gosh.
Yeah, you almost made me bleep out.
All right, what's the time?
I didn't check the time, but we're definitely off the rails in less than a minute.
Yeah, so if the over-under, if you took under on 90 seconds of off the rails, congratulations. You win a free stick. You win a free sticker. I have no idea how we're going to get it to you, but yeah, you got a sticker.
We'll send it to him in an email. I need a rim shot. Okay. We're just totally, that's like next level off the rails for us. Anyways, so how you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, man. How are you been? It actually has been a little bit since we've done this. It
has been. You've been busy. We'll get into the where was Jim for the last couple of weeks in another episode probably. But I know you've been doing a lot of traveling. Hopefully for the good of the company and the good of Mr. Palmer.
I like to think of it as the good of humanity, but it's me, so it's never going to be for the good of humanity.
And there were probably Oreos involved, but.
Funny that story for a totally different podcast.
But no, it's been a little while, and I'm good. We're getting to the end of the year almost, which is we're in November. This is crazy. We're kind of in I don't want to say a lull, but I think we've exhausted the Wi-Fi 7 stuff for a little bit. I'm sure there's going to be plenty more.
Stop saying that word. Stop saying that word.
What, little?
No. The other one.
Wi-Fi? We can't stop saying Wi-Fi. This is a Wi-Fi podcast. Yeah, I know. I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it.
All right.
So before it takes 7 minutes to get to our guest.
Well, so I like to think I was doing, work for the good of humanity, which, if you've met me, is totally not true. But I actually found somebody. Well, I guess that's a wrong way to say. I bribed this person by offering him a sticker via email to come on the podcast because this person actually has done some work for the good of humanity, believe it or not. And so I wanted to bring him on mainly because it's about a topic that John and I don't know much about. And we thought, hey, who better than to bring the creator on to talk about his tool for the good of humanity, which I think should be the new tagline. Andrea, why don't you take a second and introduce yourself to the listeners? And then we'll
wow. Wow, creator, good of humanity, man. That sets the expectation really, really high.
He's going to
disappoint so many people, man.
He's going to file this away for when his next review is coming up.
Right.
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, so I don't think I'm no creator, no good for humanity, especially in my teenage years. There wasn't much good for humanity being done there. But anyway, that's a story for another day. First of all, thanks. Thank you both for having me. We're gonna talk about some of the tools, or one tool in particular that I wrote and that I built.
Tell people your name.
That would help, right? That's true. So I'm on. Yeah. So as you can see, I'm not. I don't really do this much very often, as often as you guys. So I'm Andrea Coppini. I am, despite the name, I am actually Maltese from Malta, from a tiny little island in the Med, but I am based out of Spain nowadays. And I work exclusively in hospitality for RUCKUS. So I'm a hospitality systems engineer, responsible for the EMEA region. And that's pretty much it. I've been at RUCKUS now for just over 10 years. So I've got the golden watch and the Maserati in my driveway.
Whoa. Hold on. Hold on. I might have some questions for after we stop recording.
Yeah, a few of those points were a lie. So, like, so I've always been in hospitality, and and obviously, having to work in that kind of environment. Even before joining Ruckus, I had a small integrator myself and I was doing integration work in hospitality. So, I've done everything from, designing, ordering, and installing APs and sticking them to the walls. So I kind of understand the pains of deploying Wi-Fi and wired networks in that space. And that has led me to, build a couple of tools as well to help out, not just in that vertical, eventually, into all kinds of verticals. So yeah, that's
this actually explains a whole lot. Even before we get into why we even brought you here, is having that background of hospitality. So I mean, it actually kind of answers stuff, especially because we know John. He's just an SE. So yeah, well, wait a second, you're an SE too, so I can't insult too many SEs on this. Yes.
No, we might be the only two SEs that are listening to the show, or not sure.
I think there's a third.
Maybe.
I would.
Okay. So John, why did we bring Andrea on?
So it's a good question. So I first saw his name when I started a couple of years back, almost 3 at this point, for a tool called Crossbreeder. And I'll admit, I've never actually used it. I haven't had a need to use it, but it's always been in sort of the back of my head. And anytime I typed in, I think it's something about it on LinkedIn or whatever, I type it in and it always takes me there. And then I navigate away. My apologies. But when Jim said, let's have Andrea on to talk about this, I was like, this is awesome. I can actually finally understand what this is and what it could do for somebody listening. So with that said, what is Crossbreeder?
Right. So essentially, at its most basic, most fundamental, all it is, it's basically a batch tool for SSH commands, right? Essentially, you just feed it a CSV file, a list of IP addresses, tick a few boxes, type in a few parameters, and it will just go out and do whatever you tell it to those lists of APs, right? So you feed it a list of IPs of access points, of course, and it will go out and do the same thing to multiple access points. And the reason why kind of that is a need is that in hospitality, just like in many other verticals, but in hospitality, we deal with hundreds, sometimes thousands of access points in one single site. So most of the time, if you need to do something on one access point, you need to do it on all your other 799 access points you have in the building. So I wanted a way to kind of ease that, make that easy, and especially I wanted a way for our partners or customers to do it themselves, so I don't have to do it, right? So that's one selfish reason. So essentially, that's what it does. And also, when I started working on it, it was at a time when we at RUCKUS we had multiple controller platforms. We still do, but at the time it was kind of the transition period between Zone Director and Smart Zone, and then Unleashed came along, and then we have the Solo AP firmware, and we needed a way to cross-grade, right? Hence the name, between one platform and the other. We need an easy way to cross-grade between one and the other. So there were a couple of scripts out there, a couple of guides to run like Python scripts and things like that. But I'm an iPhone guy, so I'm lazy. I want a button to press, right? I don't want to code stuff. So that's basically what it is, right? It's basically a batch tool for SSH commands in an easy to use format.
So since I've already established that like you're working on the benefit of all humanity, that kind of makes you a superhero, right? And so look, but like any good superhero, like we've gotten kind of the backstory. There's a little bit of the backstory, but Yeah. And unfortunately, that now ends all of my superhero knowledge. So I'm just gonna guess here and be like, hey, so there had to have been something, and I'm curious now. I want to know, like not just the Batman, had his parents, and
Save
Superman,
family and
is it like, yeah. Well, so what is your I mean, yeah, it's hospitality, but there's got to be something that it's like you went, okay,
yeah.
here's this. I want to know that story behind, what is that one thing that you said, I need a tool that can do all this? I'll be honest with you, I'm really loving the whole thing of I'm lazy because, look, that's me. I can embrace this. So I want to know a little bit more.
Yeah. I think the correct way of saying it is that we abide by the work smart, not hard mantra, right? That's kind of a correct form of saying that we're lazy.
Well, but I work really hard to be lazy, so I don't know if it fully fits. So, but I still, there's got to be. I want to know what was that one thing where you sat down and you just said, okay, this is going to be really hard, so let me do a whole lot of work. I want to know what was that story? I mean,
so there's a second selfish reason. So before Crossbreeder, I built another tool, which was an API tool called DocTag for naming access points. And that was basically API, right? It's API calls to the smart zone. And that was fun. That was interesting. But I wanted something more. So I wanted to learn how to interact with devices via SSH programmatically. Because I'm not a developer, right? That is the last thing I want to do in technology. It's code and develop. So I don't like software development, ironically, for what we're talking about today. But I wanted to learn how to do that because, again, I'm lazy. If I want to interact with network devices, I'm almost 99% of the time I'm going to be doing it via SSH. So I wanted to learn a way of doing it programmatically, and that's a partly selfish reason for creating Crossbreeder, is that it was a way to learn how to do that, how to code SSH, like batch controlling SSH. So that's the selfish reason. But I was also seeing a lot of feedback from other SCs and from customers where we have migration tools built into the controller platforms to migrate from from Zone Director to cloud, for example, or to RUCKUS One now, but they had a lot of caveats, right? So you had to have a specific version on the Zone Director, and then you couldn't upgrade to that Zone Director version because you had some older APs. All of these caveats, which kind of, a lot of variables came in where where it was much easier to just SSH into the AP and do it directly with the access point. So that's what Crossbreeder does. It doesn't care what controller platform you're running. It talks directly to the access point via SSH. So it really goes grassroots, goes down to the basics, and communicates directly to the access point over IP with no special requirements.
Nice.
That makes sense?
Yeah. I think I have something new to play with. I'm going to have to dive into this one a lot. But so we know the basis, we know the story behind it. As often is the case, have you found anything else you can do with Crossbreeder that you weren't necessarily starting out thinking I was going to be able to do?
Yeah. Actually, that's a really good point. It's funny because the original aim, which the name kind of alludes to, that it was specifically a tool to just convert from firmware X to firmware Y, right? That was the only thing it was designed to do originally. But then it kind of evolved from that, partly from feedback, partly from myself using it as well, where other things have cropped up, other uses have cropped up. Like one of them, for example, was the using it essentially as a network scanner, right? Where you get into a new site, you don't have access to the controller, so you need to look for the access points on the network. You know the subnet of the access point, so you know which IP range you're roughly working with, but you don't know which AP is which, and you need a way to figure them out. And this tool actually came in handy in figuring out which APs. Maybe you have some access points which have which have orphaned, right? So they're on the network, but for some reason they couldn't join the controller, and they're just sitting there on the network. And how are you going to figure out which ones they are? Because they're stuck in a ceiling somewhere, and there's a conference going on. You can't just walk in with the ladder. So just this tool, just feed it the whole subnet of IPs. It will go out. The nice thing about it is, I think, is that it first tries to ping that IP address, and then if it gets a response on that IP, then it will try to SSH that IP. So it's really fast when it doesn't find, it does a ping. If it doesn't get a response in I think it's 10 milliseconds, it will just skip to the next one, right? So it's really fast in finding kind of that needle in the haystacks, so to speak. There's other aspects to it, like for example, it has a tool to create the control file, which is used to upgrade access points. There's a very specific format to build a control file, and if you don't get that right, then your upgrades won't work, and all of these things. But with Crossbreeder, there is actually a button which says, click here to create a control file. You just give it the firmware file you want to create a control file for, and it will just create a control file for you, even for multiple firmware images. So if you're doing a lot of cross grades or a lot of AP models, you can just feed it 10 firmware images, 20 firmware images, and it will just create those 10 or 20 control files, and in a matter of less than a second. And the last thing another thing that came about was the fact that it's not just converting firmwares, but also you want to run a CLI command. There's you want to turn off you want to set particular QoS parameters, or you want to run some particular command on the access points, which is not available via Smart Zone or via the controller platform of choice, because again, it doesn't care what controller platform you're using. So then at a later version, I've added a field, essentially an open text field, where you can just type in any commands that you want, and it will just go out and run those commands. So there's no validation, of course. It doesn't check what you've done is correct, but generally you would run it on 1 or 2 access points. Just make sure that the result is what you're expecting, and then it will just you just feed it all the rest of your access points, and it will just go out and do it.
All right, so John and I are not exactly the smartest people in the book, so I got some questions for you based on some stuff you just said, because I'm now confused, and I'm going to fall in this sword so John doesn't feel bad asking all the questions. You were talking about logging in, like it goes and discovers the APs, does that subnet scan, and then it tries to log in. Does it try logging in via the default credentials, and what happens if those default? I mean, I'm curious to know exactly a little bit more about how that works, or how it doesn't work.
Yeah. So that's one point which I faced when I was first playing with it. Like, what credentials are we going to use? So there are options within the tool itself where by default it will try to use the default credentials that we have in RUCKUS APs. Super SP admin.
Oh, don't let that out. That's super secret.
Right. So yeah, we should hide it on all the labels and all the access points.
Look, I now have a Sharpie and a mission. So
it's gonna be a big mission though. So it will try to use the default credentials, and you can actually specify. So you can specify, right? You can say use these credentials, SSH credentials, and then there's an option to say if those fail, try to use the default. So it will. So the example of before, where you're scanning a whole network, you might have some access points which are connected to the Smart Zone or to a controller, and they have your secure, ultra secure credentials, password 123. But then you might have a batch of access points which are still in their factory default state, right? Which ones are you going to scan for? By setting the right parameters, you can actually discover both. And once it does the scan, it will show you a list of all the access points, the AP model. It will show you the AP model, the firmware version they're running, the name of the access point. If it's if it's default, obviously it will show it as RUCKUS AP. If it's not default, it will show you whatever name you gave it. So it's it's quite a good documenting tool as well. If you have a situation where you have some of your APs connecting and some not, maybe you can instantly see that all your I don't know, all your R770s are not connecting, because you're not running the right firmware version, the right controller version, right? And you can instantly see that based on the result that comes out from a scan, basically.
So that's actually kind of interesting, because I know that's one of the things that a lot of organizations struggle with is, you say documentation, and as soon as you said it, the first thing that popped in my head was, this is actually more like asset inventory type of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, because
absolutely.
I was telling a story last week about an AP that, in my previous job, that had actually been installed in the ceiling for 2 years. And like, it never joined anything. And it was just sitting there, like, just doing nothing for 2 years. And no one ever actually said, and no one ever said, hey, we should have coverage here. We don't, because it's not doing anything. And no one ever actually went to figure it out. And so it's like, here's this asset that's been sitting in a ceiling doing nothing for 2 years, and nobody knew it was there. So
we had the reverse in one instance, in fact, where there was one access point which was a leftover from a previous install. Obviously, it wasn't a hotel. It was in a hallway above a ceiling, hidden behind all the ducting and everything. But it was essentially a honeypot, right? So it was running the same SSIDs as the new install, but it wasn't connected to anything. Don't ask me how it was getting power, but somehow it was powered up. It was connected to some switch in some closet somewhere, and obviously nobody in the property knew where that AP was connected to. But and we couldn't get to it, right? So the ceiling was closed, so we couldn't even get to it to turn it off, to pull it out. So we used Crossbreeder to figure out, the IP, at least, of the access point. So then we could essentially brute force it and figure out where it, figure it out, and at least turn off the radios, So yeah, so there's all of these kind of corner cases where I've deliberately kept Crossbreeder as simple as possible, right? Because the more kind of advanced functionality you build into a tool, from my viewpoint, is the more advanced functionality it is, the more you're restricting the use of that tool, right? So I've left it as open as basic as possible, just so that you can use it for it's one of your tools in your toolbox. It doesn't do everything, but you can use it as as you see fit, essentially.
Oh, you say it's simple. It looks pretty powerful to me.
I bet you John and I can break it.
It won't take much. I said, I'm no developer, I'm no coder, so
I have a hammer. I can break anything with a hammer, right?
Yeah, that won't take much to crash this one, that's for sure. But in fact, yeah, those are a couple of things which I want to do, is improve the stability and improve the speed of the tool. So and I haven't got there just because I don't have the time, but mostly the skill to figure out how to do it correctly. So
John brings up a good question. He says he can break it with a hammer, but what does Crossbreeder run on? Because if I'm running on my little single board computer, then yeah, I can probably break it with a hammer. But if it's running on my daily driver, what do you run it on? Is it a SIR? I mean,
it's a Windows app. It's a Windows application, Windows or Mac OS. So it runs on it's a tool. There's no install. There's no, you don't need to install JVMs, for example, or you don't need to install any of that. You just download the zip file, unzip it, double click on the exe file, and it will just run. So that's one of the things which I really focused on. In our machines usually are loaded with all kinds of junk, so I didn't want to contribute even more to that junk. So I wanted to keep it simple, just a simple zip file, download, extract, run it, and that's it. And it runs on Windows and Mac OS.
Nice. So John, you can break it with a hammer.
I don't want to break my Mac though, so we'll try not to break it. We'll just try to use it. How about that?
So what other feedback have you gotten about Crossbreeder? I mean, because again, anytime I'm on anything about Ruckus, I always, it's like somebody is always dropping like, hey, use this Crossbreeder. So I know that I mean, it's fairly well known. I mean, what type of feedback have you gotten? And as something that was done, by a Ruckus employee, but not as a.
Like I say, even in the about, this comes with no support. It's as much support as you can. I forgot how I wrote it, but it's um, as much support as you can get out of something which was written in between, like over a couple of flights, right? Because that was literally where most of the coding was done, literally while I was traveling from one place to another. But overall, the feedback has been very positive. I was surprised, in fact, that I've seen it being mentioned even in some Ruckus support documentation. Although it's definitely not a Ruckus product, it's not supported by Ruckus. Even our own support team has got into situations where that has helped them, and that's I'm proud of that. It's nice to see that being recognized even by the support organization. It's being called out in webinars, RTF, Ruckus Technical Family webinars as well, and I've seen it being mentioned on Reddit. And you know how it is. Once something gets mentioned on Reddit, that means it's achieved cult status. So that was a very proud moment, because nobody praises anything on Reddit. So so that was very positive. But yeah, the feedback has been great. I mean, for being a tool which I had no intention of, I never intended it to become anything. It's just a small tool which I needed for myself, and I kind of put it out there for my colleagues to use. And now it's out there, and people are really liking it. So
I just want to rewind back to like a minute ago. We're talking to like a cult icon, Jim. He said it. So it's true.
He's a superhero
and a cult icon.
Working for the benefit of humanity and a cult icon. I mean,
he's like Batman.
Is he
nobody
Batman?
Mentions me. They mention the tool, so I'm just the nobody.
But after this, there will literally be tens of people who will now be able to tie Crossbreeder to Andrea. So you're welcome.
Batman's butler at most. What was his name?
Alfred. But Alfred was the brains behind the operation, and really, as Batman said, his superpower was being rich. So, anyways. Now you mentioned it, and Jim mentioned it. We've heard about it being mentioned all over the place. It's pretty successful for being, as you said, an unofficial part of the family, which is an awesome thing to have done. So thank you for that. Do you have any other useful tools that people might not know about?
Well, the other tool which kind of goes in parallel with it is DocTag. I mentioned it briefly before, and it's a completely different use case, right? And DocTag is it's a tool for naming access points. Well, it started out, again, it kind of evolves, gets a life on its own, but it started out as a tool for naming access points. And the reason why I wrote it was, again, I was tired of supporting customer sites, logging into a controller and seeing 800 access points called RUCKUS AP, which is the default name, right? And when I was trying to, whenever I asked which AP are we talking about, or what is this, which one is this access point, they used to pull up Excel sheets, massive Excel sheets with the name, the location, the port number, and the MAC address, and the name of the access point. So I was like, why aren't you importing these into the Smart Zone, which makes more sense, right? Having all the information in the controller which you're managing. And they were like, yeah, we will do it once we deploy it. But if you do it after the deployment and once it's done as part of your UAT, it's already too late, right? Because your platform, in theory, should already be running stable by then. You don't want to, you want to have the name and the, kind of all the details of your access points in front of you while you're deploying, because that's where you're dealing with most of the issues during the deployment. So again, that's basically the kind of the primary scope of the tool. Is you feed it a CSV file with MAC address of an access point, the name, the description, the GPS coordinates if you want, and this tool will take that CSV file, connect to a Smart Zone, and go out and name all the access points within the Smart Zone. Because everyone likes naming access points in Excel. It's much easier, it's much faster. but then you want that data to be in SmartZone itself. SmartZone still doesn't have an easy batch naming tool. You have to go in and name the access points one by one. Again, I'm lazy. I'm not going to go in and click on every single access point, especially if I have a hotel with 700, 800, or 1,500 access points. So that was how I built that tool. So
that's
nice.
It's interesting because I'm sure John is like taking notes of this one because he's running some deployments. Who he actually did take a note. I'm beyond impressed. I thought I was the only one that wrote on this podcast. Or are you making fun of me? I can't.
Seems empty.
Sorry.
He got it. I have notes.
It's blurred out, yeah.
I'll pull the curtain back a little bit. This has been just such an interesting and fascinating conversation. And John and I we were messaging earlier, and we're like, how have we not had this conversation with you earlier? Because I mean, I'm sitting here and it's like between Crossbreeder and dog tag. I'm like, these are two tools that I should have been recommending to people years ago, but I just didn't know about it. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, I'm blown away by the versatility and the fact that you wrote it because you were sort of lazy.
Yep.
I'm mad respect, my friend. I mean,
can't be that lazy. He wrote it, I mean, it's just
wasn't there some like big company that was like, we give all our toughest projects to the laziest people we have because they're the ones that come up with like the really unique ways of solving it because they're like, well, this is just easier if I completely solve it a different way. And so
makes sense.
Again, I mean, you say that it's not like a quote unquote official or a supported one, but with as much as I've seen it mentioned inside the company as well as outside the company, I think you're pretty safe in saying that, this is a, an official tool that I think more of us should be using and quite frankly, we should be talking more about. So
and you say that and I realized something, Mr. Palmer.
What's that?
We recorded an episode 2 weeks ago and this would have been perfect to be on it, but it's not an official feature. So it kind of is, we've got an excuse to leaving it off. Unsung features, unsung things, I can't talk, things about Ruckus. We didn't talk about Crossbreeder.
We did not.
Well, now we've got an episode 2 for that one. Well, heck, it really, it shines a light. It's so important. It's so impactful. And it's been talked about so many different places that one episode where you got to mention wasn't enough. You got a whole episode dedicated to your tools.
Oh, that's a nice way of playing that one.
You like that?
I'm down with that.
Okay.
So, I can't believe we're out of time. And the fact that you are in Spain means that even though I can still officially say it's morning here, it's actually kind of late for you. Look, I got 10 more minutes while it's still morning.
Yeah, no, I was just keeping you honest.
How can people find Crossbreeder and dog tag? How can they give the feedback? Well, plug yourself here for us.
Right. So the easiest is to just do a search for dog tag or Crossbreeder on Google. It will show up because it's on GitHub. I have a link on it on my LinkedIn profile. There is a direct link. It's dogtag.tacoppini. So TA and then my last name, tacoppini.com. So dogtag.tacoppini.com. That will take you to a page where I have all my tools and some documents that I wrote, and you can find it there. But the easiest way is Google. That will it will show up one way or another, and that's it. So if there's anyone who has any feedback, I'm always open to feedback. Doesn't mean that I will implement them because it needs a lot of time and to kind of to always ramp up and go back to it from what is essentially my day job. But I'm always curious to hear how it's being used and how to evolve the tool even further. Maybe not for the better of humanity, but for the betterment of people's sanity, at least.
So for the betterment of our massive amount of listeners, I will actually do the Googling for you, and because I think it would be really cool if our podcast show notes actually had a link to GitHub, because I think that would be a first for us. So I will do that work for you guys, and get that link in there so you can find the dog tag and the Crossbreeder application. And
We'll be there.
This has been a fascinating conversation, and one I wish we would have had a long time ago. So thank you for taking time out of your evening to join us today.
Thank you guys for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, no, definitely. We appreciate it. And I think it was the hardest one to schedule just because it's the biggest time zone difference we've had to deal with so far. So, we recognize that it's, like Jim said, it's, I think, 7, 8 o'clock for you?
It's just before dinner time. That's what, Spain moves late in general.
But still, we know it's nearly your Friday. So it's you want to be relaxing with the, not work. So we appreciate it. And it was, I'm really glad to finally have gotten under the hood with Crossbreeder and dog tag, which is something I hadn't known about. As I joked with Mr. Palmer in the background, I wasn't expecting to learn something today. It wasn't on my agenda, but I did. So thank you.
Thank you again.
And on that note,
all right,
I don't think we've got anything else, right, Jim?
Now we're going to let Andrea go to dinner, and we'll catch everybody on the next episode.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
If you want to contact the show directly, you can email us using the address ruckcast@comscope.com. To learn more about Ruckus products and services that we may have talked about on this or any other podcast, please check the links in the About section of the show.